Dayo was released in 1992. It's directed by Michael Schultz and written by Bruce Franklin Singer, and this stars Delta Burke as Grace and Elijah Wood as her childhood imaginary friend Dayo. The film is okay. It's quite slow, but there are a couple of scenes that I really loved, and the characters are really likable. The performances are very good, and I think it has a nice message about trying to evaluate whether you're on the right track and whether what you're doing in life actually makes you happy. Grace is at an interesting time in her life where things are going to start changing. I don't want to give away too much because I don't know exactly how much of it would be a spoiler. It's not in the description on IMDb, so I will also choose to not go into too much more detail. But basically, she's at a time in her life when things are going to start changing, and out of nowhere, her childhood imaginary friend, Dayo, appears. And of course, she freaks out because this is not what she expected to happen. But eventually, quite quickly, I suppose, she comes to terms with the fact that he is back for whatever reason. And the film is about her, with Dayo's prompting, evaluating where she wants to be in life and what her current situation is like by looking back on her past. Now, I will say there are far too many flashbacks and dream sequences and these kind of mock hallucinations. They're not actually hallucinations, but she starts to overthink things and we get to see them playing out in a way that distresses her. If there were only a few of those, it would have been okay, but in the first half of the film, there are so many of them that I really didn't like them. And I will say the first half of the film I thought was kind of boring and very slow, but the second half, give or take, was actually really good. And as I said, there are two scenes that I really loved, and I will mention those scenes, but they are spoilers. Well, potentially spoilers, so I'll keep that for just now. I think Grace is not an unlikable character, but I didn't think she was very interesting. The performance is very believable, and the way she responded to Dayo, I thought was very realistic. But as a character, I felt she just was a little bit dull, wasn't that interesting. Again, I don't dislike her, there's nothing wrong with her, and nothing wrong with the performance. I just feel like the character wasn't written in a way that was as interesting as she could have been. Dayo, on the other hand, was a little bit more interesting, but if your character is an imaginary friend, there's always going to be an element of fascination there anyway, and I think Elijah Wood did a brilliant job with the character. I also think all of the other actors did a great job acting around a character they can't see, because it must be difficult to be in a scene with a character you're not meant to be able to see, and to not look at that character, to not respond whenever they talk. It must be difficult, and they all, did a great job with that. It was all very convincing, and I think the way Dayo was placed in the scenes made a lot of sense and allowed the scenes to play out in a way that was very convincing, and that made me believe there was an imaginary child in the room. So that all worked really well. It's just ultimately very slow for the first half of the film, and I think the whole thing is about an hour and a half. It's not a tremendously long film, but I did spend about 40 minutes wondering when I'd start finding it entertaining. I didn't dislike it, it just didn't make me feel anything really. And then we had a couple of scenes and things got a lot better. So I do recommend the film. I think it is a decent enough narrative, and the idea of looking back on your childhood, Dayo makes a lot of comments. Things that are quite funny, actually. Dayo's lines are very well written and well delivered, of course, where he remarks quite frequently about how Grace has changed because she's got, food in her cupboard other than cookies, and she goes to work when obviously when you're a child, you've got more freedom, even though when you're a child, you think adults have got more freedom. And those things making us think about how life has changed so much since we were children, evaluating what we valued as children versus where we're heading as adults. I think it offers a lot of food for thought, and I think that part of the film, it definitely explored really, really well. So it's not a bad narrative. The characters are okay. Grace maybe not the most fascinating, but Dayo kind of makes up for that. The performances are really good, and after the halfway point, I think things really picked up. So if it sounds like your kind of thing, I definitely recommend it. And I guess I'll mention the two scenes now that I personally really enjoyed. They're not really spoilers for things that happen in the narrative or key plot points, but they are spoilers for what I consider to be the most entertaining moments, and one of them completely took me by surprise. So the element of surprise I enjoyed. So I'm going to say spoilers from now. And the first moment, the moment that I loved, is when Grace stood up and started singing Dayo. Partly because I didn't expect it, but also because that song's incredible. And if you put that song in a film, and it is in, of course, other films, namely Beetlejuice, it makes the scene just fabulous and fascinating and awesome, and that's exactly what we get here. The other scene I love is the scene at the fairground, and that's quite simply because I love fairgrounds and I love films that are set in fairgrounds, because I think the sets are wonderful and brightly coloured and fun and vibrant, and that's what we get here. And obviously it's a very childlike environment, which worked very well for the narrative. So I did enjoy Dale. It's not a perfect film. I don't know if I'd ever watch it again, but all of that being said, I liked it and I do recommend it.